Welcome to Beyond the Office, Building and Leading Remote Teams. I'm your host, Bill Keller. And on today's episode, we're excited to have Steve McMillen with us. Steve is an expert in automation and AI. And as things are heating up in the AI race, we wanted to have an expert on to help us to navigate this incredibly complex world as we move forward into the world of AI. So, Steve, it's great to have you on the show with us today.
Wonderful. It's nice to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, Bill.
Well, we wanted to have you on the show because while we deal with remote teams, I really feel AI is changing the landscape for pretty much everything. But in addition to changing the way remote teams work and teams work just in general, I'm seeing that this is actually going to be an extension of our team in many ways using AI agents. And so I think we really need to come up with kind of a paradigm shift in how we see AI and how we work with AI. And that's why I thought it would be great to have you on the show today. So just to kind of get started, could you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get into this? Because, while we think of AI being kind of new, this automation, everything's kind of coming together in a big way. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
So I've always loved technology and always been a little bit of a tinkerer in just about everything that I could get my hands on. And so for the longest while, my focus was primarily on just web technology in general. I did development for, of course, you have your websites, but, various different types of applications and tools. And I've always had an eye for workflow efficiency. I've always just enjoyed it. Even before I started getting in and writing code, I was always looking for those shortcuts that just made my workflow more streamlined and more efficient and allowed me to, in the end, do better work. And so those things kind of come together naturally. And as I was, focused on various development type projects for different industries, you start to see the emergence of AI, in this earliest form, it was like accessibility to just the ChatGPT, chatbot. So beginning to play with that and to dive into that and start to see some of the really exciting potential there just kind of got my focus and a number of the people that I worked with just really wanting to follow along and knowing that, it was going to get to a point that it was just going to impact everything. So over time, I've been working with a number of companies to be able to leverage AI. That might be something as simple as just getting them to be able to better use the chatbot and get better results from it. But, as the tools and the means and opportunities out there have improved, we can do almost anything at this point now. And it's almost limited just by imagination.
It is incredible what I've seen and how fast the changes are coming. It just seems I'm getting overwhelmed and I'm in this space and I just see like every week, it just seems like there's something new out there. So could you tell us, what are you seeing? What are some of the recent developments in architecture and programming? And, what are some of the new things that are just really exciting for you that you're seeing that most people might not be aware of?
So the first thing I'm going to mention, and it might be something a little bit different than what you're expecting, is just the level of accessibility. And in that, there are so many tools that are being created now. There are so many existing products that are getting AI bolted onto it that just by that level of accessibility, it's creating an environment where organizations have to push even harder to come up with original ideas and be able to move the technology forward. So I think that accessibility and how that's starting to permeate really aspect of our work is just a tremendously big thing. But, you mentioned, programming automation, architecture, some of these things. And, as I had mentioned before, we started out with just ChatGPT, working in that. And so we'd copy and paste some stuff in, we'd pull stuff out. And then we started to get opportunities to integrate it with it at a different level, specifically through APIs. And so, I come from a developer background, so I'm very used to using code to, define processes that are taking place in the background to leverage it in different ways without, that manual intervention. And that kind of opened the door for some new possibilities. But as technology has continued to expand, as we've seen further development, and certainly an area that you've been in quite a bit is the no-code tools that are out there. This is essentially a layer of abstraction kind of between the hard nuts and bolts programming and something that is a little bit more easy to utilize, where you can come with general concepts of what you want to accomplish, and it's much easier to put it together. I like to often talk about, as I've seen the shift in the development world with AI, it used to be that as a developer, my strongest expertise was my knowledge of syntax and being able to put something together that was going to logically address the issue and get the kind of outcome that was needed. But we're kind of transitioning away where you just need these general concepts and you're less knowing the code, knowing the syntax is becoming much less important. It's more about the ideas that you have, and some of these no-code tools. I mean, Zapier has been one that's been around for forever and is known for just an easy to access tool for integrating all sorts of different systems. But you see new things like Make, you see N8N coming out that have stepped up the game even more and just provide a whole different level of accessibility. So you don't need to have strong technical background. You maybe have a concept of what you want to do, and those tools are making it much more approachable, and you just don't have to worry about that deep, scary code aspect of it. And what's really interesting, and we're starting to see more and more right now, is another layer of abstraction above that, where, and in the programming world, we kind of call it vibe programming, where it's more about expressing the concepts of what I want. And I'm not even having to break it down. Like if you go into something like Zapier, or you go into something like Make, I'm using all these nodes to put together to get the process and the flow of what I want. But, it's getting to the point now, they're releasing some tools where I can essentially say, hey, I want to do this, explain the process a little bit and just kind of conversational text. And it creates the starting point for you. So as the technology continues to advance, as it continues to learn from our usage of it, it's going to get even better and better. And so we're going to see a day where, we're not even thinking about code. And we're just explaining, hey, make me this. And I want it to do 1, 2, 3 and output this. And there you go.
Yeah, I've always been amazed at how quickly this is coming. You talked about the no code tools. And one of the reasons that I've kind of focused on those is just because, one, it's easier, it's more accessible for different types of people rather than just coders. And now we're moving in this age where you don't even need to know the code, but you do need to know the ideas and how to put things together. So it's not like you can, most people will just come in here and be expert coders. There's still that knowledge you need. But what are some of the things, in case somebody's listening, on the news? I think Cursor is one of them for this vibe coding. What any of the other ones out there that people, so in case they hear names out there, they'll understand what it's related to?
There's a bunch of plugins for something called VS Code, which is probably the top development IDE. It's a tool we write code in, and there's a bunch of different plugins for that allow us to integrate with various AI tools. So you can be using Gemini one day, you can be using Claude another day, you can be using OpenAI the next day, and all of those tools have their strengths and weaknesses, and they all have their different pricing levels too. So it's nice to have options. But I think the biggest thing that I find interesting about this is how it is essentially causing developers to have to transition more into architects. And there was always a bit of a component to that with what we did before, but we're kind of losing that concern for syntax, and we're being able to focus much more on the structure. What do I want? How do I break it down into small parts? Because when you're dealing with, and vibe coding is just a very loose term, but when you're, working in Cursor, or when you're working in, VS Code with something like Rue, or there's a couple of different plugins like that, it's not going to always maintain context of your full code base. And so breaking tasks down into manageable bites where it can still stay aware of everything going on and figuring out a strategy for how you're going to work through and build it. We talk about AI, and AI is a tool. And like any tool, it can produce great things and it can produce horrible things. We'll regularly use the illustration of, like a chisel. If you give me a chisel and a hammer and a big chunk of stone, I'm not going to make anything terribly pretty with that. But you give somebody who has skill and a vision and creativity, and they're going to be able to make an incredible statue out of that. So AI is the same way. Those of us that try to stay as aware as we can of what is going on, that we get our hands dirty with it, we're going to have an ability to leverage the tool to get a better quality results than a lot of people are going to be able to do that don't have that experience. But honestly, there's a lot of very basic things that most people can do to step up and get even higher quality results from just their more low level use, even just when interacting with ChatGPT.
And that's a great thing. While we're kind of talking high level and a little bit more technical, I really want to get down to the nuts and bolts for the people that are using this. And like you said, is what are some of those things that somebody who might just be using ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, any one of the LLMs, what are some of the things that they can do to get the most out of these types of systems?
So the biggest thing the biggest mistake that I typically come across is people making prompts that are too short, not having enough expectation of what it's going to produce and not being specific enough with it. So if I go in and I just tell it to, make me a report on this, it's going to do what it can, but it'd be much like if I hired an intern, and if I just asked him that same thing, who knows what I'm going to get? It might be great. It might be horrible. But, what I'm actually going to do with an intern is I'm going to train them a little bit more. I'm going to provide some broader context. I'm going to provide a little bit more expansion on the task. I'm certainly going to have an expectation of him that he comes with a certain kind of knowledge base or role. And then I'm going to provide some guidance on what I want in my output. And so I regularly approach AI the same way. And I mean, this is a simple thing for everybody to do just when they're pulling up ChatGPT and interacting with it and looking to produce something a little bit more serious than just asking it a question of what's a good recipe to make with some extra chicken that I have in the fridge. And that is provide it more information. Define a role, okay? You are an expert in online digital marketing with emphasis on social media ads. Tell it the task, break out the details, provide it as much background information as you can. If you're looking to have it define something for you to help you come up with, say, a strategy related to, online ads, give it a lot of information about your company and about the demographic that you're after, and then provide a level of specificity with what you are looking for, but don't just settle for saying give me the copy for a great ad. No, give me 20 examples of, good ads that I can draw from. So we often don't ask enough of it and we don't give it enough to work with. I mean, it'll try. I always find the best results when I get a little long-winded with my prompts, to be honest.
And I love actually giving it examples. I think that's another key point of this is the type of output that I'm looking for. If you say, hey, I'm looking for a report, well, how long should that report be? What are you looking? Is it a short report? Is it a longer report? I sometimes now you can actually upload pictures. So let's say you're creating an ad or a certain ad copy. You're going to say take a picture of the ad from, whatever it is, either online or it's a print ad, and say, hey, I really like this style, this type of language. There's lots that you can do. Like you said, is really, putting and investing into the ask without, getting, I think people are just have this expectation. Well, I just ask it a question and immediately understands exactly what I'm looking for. It's kind of like if you're married, your wife or husband, assuming, oh, you should know what I'm thinking, right? ChatGPT is the same way in many ways. So.
And it'll try. It's an intern that never says no. In fact, I don't know that most people know, but you can actually in ChatGPT, you can set kind of what it refers to as a system prompt if you go in your account preferences, and you can provide some kind of underlying prompt information that will be applied to every conversation you have with it. And I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes ChatGPT can be a little over affirming. And so I actually provide information to it to say, hey, I want you to be very straight with me. If I am giving you ideas that don't make sense and are stupid, tell me. Don't look to be always, building my confidence and, agreeing with what I'm saying. Hold it to account and, give me something that's going to be useful. But, just like getting back to the intern, the intern's going to say no sometimes, but the better I can equip them to do the job, the more likely that they will be able to do it and do it well. And you talked a little bit about providing examples. One of the things that I've done is I've provided it a bunch of different examples of my writing style in a number of different contexts. If I'm doing something formal, like if I'm writing a speech or something of that nature, or if I'm writing emails, how does my personality show through in those? And I'll provide a bunch of different examples. So when I'm actually asking it to create content for me that I'm going to be using, or maybe it's part of, some emails or other communication, I can reference those and I can say, hey, I'm looking for output that speaks in my voice as, these examples that I've provided you. And I get much better results. And I think there is a diminishing tolerance for AI-based communication. And so it's really important for us to use the tool well, so we can avoid that, because it's going to be a game changer. But you can also kind of recognize those things that were just spit out without much training or prep.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, what are some of I think there's some new ways to really interface, and I say new, but how would you interface to be able to give, ChatGPT or the LLMs some of this background information? What are some of the ways that people might be able to do that they don't normally think of?
Well, one of the simple ways, if you're using ChatGPT, again, I tend to focus on that a lot because that's what most people are familiar with. There's other tools out there, and most of them have something that is pretty equivalent to what I'm going to mention. But in ChatGPT, they have what's referred to as projects, and you can use it in a simple form where it's essentially just like a folder where you have certain types of chats within that project. But you can be much more specific in it as well. And you can provide a library of uploaded content and specific system prompts so that every conversation that happens underneath that project, that information is going to be applied to it. So it can draw from that more consistently, and you don't have to just keep re-uploading content. Because that's one of the things that we want to be smart about in our use. If you have a task that you regularly do, take the time to work up a good prompt for it that you can reuse. Obviously, update as necessary with the specifics, but also use AI to help you develop that prompt. I mean, that's one of the secret tools I think sometimes that we use is like, we use AI to help make our AI prompts, and it will help us think about situations that we might not have initially asked, and it will help also refine some of what we're asking for an output. So, in the very simplest manner of approaching those OpenAI ChatGPT projects are a really nice way to group some information that you want regularly applied to any of the conversations within that. And even it's just a nice way to organize like conversations so it's easier to reference. Because if you look in my ChatGPT history, I mean, I have to be really careful with renaming conversations so I can actually find things that are important that I've done.
That's great. I wasn't aware of that. I know there's custom rules, custom settings, and custom GPTs. But I wasn't aware of that. The other thing that I think is really, at least for me, it's revolutionary, is talking to it. Put it in speech mode, and I'm going down the road, and I'll have a conversation with it, just like, and sometimes it'll be a coach, sometimes it'll be a strategy session, and I'm just having this conversation back and forth, or do speech to text. If you're just trying to get a lot of information in, oftentimes we'll try to type something in or give it some background. But I think, like you said, is the more information, the more background that you can give it. And, having some of those tools, speech to text, where I just kind of like vomit on the page, I put it all out there and let it organize the thoughts. I found it to revolutionize, what I get out of it, but also how much it can help me in the various different fields. Because oftentimes I'm like, how do I think about this? How do I prompt this? And then just let it do its work. I'll ask it, ask me all the questions that you need to come up with this prompt. Like you said, make it do the work for you.
Yeah, and that's actually an important point that I forgot to mention before. When you're interacting with it, when I'm doing something fairly complex and I provided a big prompt, before asking for an output, I actually instruct it, okay, now based on this information, ask me important questions that will allow you to better, produce the result that I'm looking for. So don't even try to give me an answer yet. Start asking me questions so that I can speak to maybe some of the areas that I overlooked. And sometimes I've been amazed at some of those questions that have come up. But to some of what you were speaking to, the conversation mode, man, I love that. And I use it in much the same way. I will be going down the road, and I will listen to podcasts or ebooks or audiobooks or something like that. And so a lot of my first use of AI as it related to actual like voice to text or something was in transcription tools that I would use while driving, that I could trigger them to actually take notes because I'm listening to a cool podcast. I'm listening to a cool audiobook that has ideas that like, oh man, I want to check into that, or I want to do something like that. And so obviously not the best time for me to try to be typing in my phone. So, trigger my notes app, or I had an app that I used where I had a shortcut on my Apple Watch where I could just press a button that was on the watch face, and it would start recording, and then it would transcribe the note for me, and then I could go back and then take it from that inbox and put it wherever. But it was tremendous in that case. Moving on from that, as we more and more, especially in the digital world, are dealing with these kind of online, meetings via Zoom and Google Meet and everything. Obviously there's the transcription tools going on there to get a full list of what's happening, what everybody said. But those are really great to then use with AI as well, because there's been a number of times where I'll pop it in AI, and it's easy to get, okay, what are the to-dos that I got out of this? But sometimes I'll go even further. It's like, okay, based on the tone of this particular person, perhaps my contact with a given client, and based on some of the things that I'm working toward, what are the ways that I'm going to be able to best communicate with that individual that's going to allow them to feel pleased and content with the work I'm doing, that's going to best resonate with them. So there's a little bit of like almost personality analysis going on just based on how they speak. And it gives me some insight to be able to serve that person better. And a lot of times we look at AI, and I don't want to go off on a huge tangent, as something that is diminishing roles. And we can certainly talk about that if you wanted to. But I like to think of it as something that is expanding our capability. So, I could literally have the same group of people, and I can do so much more, so much better with the resources that AI is making available. And, as it steps more and more into, certainly the conversational function of the ChatGPT app on your phone is amazing. I will, nowadays I regularly use it for like, help teach me this. I want to learn about this. Here is my background. So as you're explaining this new concept to me, use illustrations that relate to my area of expertise so that I'm going to get some of the concepts that you're talking about. And so I'll just be driving for an hour long and just having a conversation with my AI assistant there, essentially. And it's just amazing at what you can learn. But it can go much further than that. I've literally been under the hood of my wife's car trying to fix an issue with the conversation function on, describing the situation that I'm seeing and getting recommendations and ideas for how to fix it. So, the limitations are limited by your imagination.
Actually, with a voice feature, if people aren't aware, you can actually turn on a video and then it'll see what you're talking about. My daughter brought home a camera from school, an SLR, and she was asking about this, and I'm like, didn't they go over this in class on how to set the the ISO setting or something of that nature? And she's like, it was long and boring, so I really wasn't listening. I was like, oh, that's honest. And then I put on ChatGPT, I put on the voice feature, put on the thing, and it says, hey, we need to change the ISO and the f-stop, and it's saying, I said, is this the button? And I told it the model of the camera. Yep, that's the button, turn that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's incredible, this type of tutor that we have right in our pocket. One thing I did want to mention that I heard the other day that I think is really important to getting the most out of ChatGPT. It said the people that really, like, there's two groups of people. One who performs better using AI and one performs worse using AI. And what they found was how they viewed AI. And while we said AI is a tool, they said that's actually the wrong way to envision AI. That really we should be envisioning AI as a teammate. And I really felt that was just a different perspective. And because what they were really getting to is, well, what would you do with a teammate if they didn't turn out good work? Normally if it's a tool, we say, stupid AI, can't get anything right. I can't believe this is no good, that kind of thing. But if we had a teammate in front of us, hopefully we wouldn't be doing that. We'd be like, okay, what did they need to know? Why did it go wrong? How could we coach them? How could we do this in a better way to get better results? What would that look like? And I think that's a really important shift in perspective that will help most people if you understood that and understand that this is not a sprint. This is a long-term game where you're needing to understand how to utilize this because it's not going away. And the same thing is just like with personal development or developing anybody in your staff. It should be evolving, right? The things that you need to teach them today are not the things that you're going to need to teach them, 6 months or a year from now. Hopefully they're learning and it's changing. And I see that is as a big mindset shift change.
Yeah, absolutely. And your mention of kind of a coworker That was my first exposure to it in the application of development work. I'm writing the code, I'm doing the work there, but I have it open on the side, and it's essentially the senior developer that I'm asking some questions and testing some ideas I have against. And sometimes it would spit out some code for me, but interacting with it like it's a partner that knows a couple more things than you might know, but doesn't know what you are trying to accomplish as well. So working with it and communicating back and forth, like somebody that's sitting next to you at the desk is definitely, depending on the application, a very good way to think about it and to approach it.
So one thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about how to get the most out of ChatGPT, but there are some specific prompting ways to prompt ChatGPT. We kind of talked about it, prompting it to be an expert, giving it some examples. But what is chain of thought? Maybe you could talk about this and how important is this in utilizing it to get good results, especially for longer answers?
Yeah, so I think my first exposure to this was a time that I was playing around with DeepSeek, and that is an AI model actually developed out of China, but one that has honestly been giving OpenAI a bit of a run for its money, at least initially. And when using its reasoning model, I was putting in some queries. I don't even remember what I was doing. And as part of its output, it doesn't just jump to the result. It outputs a section where it refers to it. This is what I'm thinking. So it's like, okay, well, Steve, asked me to do this, but I don't really know what he meant about this one thing. Is it blue or is it red? So I need to think about that a little bit and figure out, the details for that. If I don't have the information, I need to make an assumption there. And it was just this ongoing reasoning that, looked at each step of what I was asking for to figure out what it needs to know before it can get to the next step. So that essentially is, take it away from that and it doing it and apply it yourself. That is essentially what chain of thought prompting is. It's essentially guiding the AI to think step by step before just jumping to the final answer. So instead of me just asking, what is the best CRM for a retail company? Maybe I'm going to say, okay, walk me through the factors that a small retail business should consider in choosing a CRM. And then maybe, talk about your, specific niche or your industry and some of your specific needs. How you do your marketing, and get feedback from it on those right ways to do things and the things to consider. And then based on all of that, you can tell it to, provide me, say, 5 top recommendations based on those factors that you helped me identify. So it's a method for improving the depth and the logic and allowing it to give you more specific, accurate answers that are going to help you in your specific situation. So, and one of the things that I also always try to recommend people to do, don't be afraid to push back and to ask questions and to challenge what it gives you. I mean, I do that regularly. It's like, well, hey, I don't think you thought about this, or maybe you didn't know this. And some of its output maybe had me think about that when I didn't before. So, never just settle for, the first result, work to refine it. It's going to produce a better result. But breaking down the way you're thinking about what do I need to know to make the next decision, to make the next decision, to make the next decision. And then based on all that information, I'm going to be much better off at getting to my final result that I'm after.
I think a lot of people aren't aware of this, but we see computers as they remember everything, their memory's kind of perfect, but also with AI and the way that it works, sometimes it can get lost, especially if you have it a long prompt or a long, you're looking for a long output. So you might say okay, I'm looking to do this report on this particular thing. Make me an outline. Okay. And then I'd like you to write this, going letter by letter in the outline, and just start writing it piece by piece so that it stays on track and in the end produces a greater, a better result. And so that's as part of the chain of thought, moving through that direction, I think is important as well. But I think there's this recursive type of prompting that I think is really important as well. And that is after you get the result, like you said, push back on it. You can actually put it back into the LLM to then say okay, here's the work that you put out. Maybe you put it into a different chat, ask it to see your work from a different perspective. Now I want you to I wanted you to write this report. Now I want you to view and edit this report as an editor or as, as a client, somebody, what would they want and how would I be able to give them, information in a way that it's going to be more accessible for them. And doing that several different times can actually give you a much better output as well.
Yeah, we didn't really get into touching on deep research yet. I want to make everybody aware of what that is, just so we can dive into this a little bit more, because that's an area that I find it extremely useful to kind of do this, numerous conversations with AI and breaking those conversations apart to get to the result. So deep research is a functionality that's available on most of your major AI models. And it is a functionality that brings together a higher level of reasoning with accessibility to the internet and a greater knowledge base. So if I am looking to, figure out how to do, XYZ, I can go in and I always start with an early AI conversation to help develop the prompt. I'll say, hey, can you help me make a deep research prompt? I am attempting to do this. I am trying to get this kind of output, and what are my goals? What is some context that's going to help it be useful? And then I have it generate a deep research prompt. And then I will go, and this ties in a little bit to what we were just mentioning with that multi-step, is I will use a bunch of tools. I will use ChatGPT. I will use Gemini. I will use Perplexity. And I will toss my query in there, and I will have them all do deep research. And so that deep research query takes a little bit to run, but it's going out and it's looking across web pages. It's pulling information together. It's applying reasoning to it to figure out, what do I have to know before I can take the next step with what they're wanting. So, it might scan 100 different websites to gather information that it needs to know and see available tools or resources that are out there, and then come back with this nice, sometimes extremely lengthy result that you look at. It's like, okay, now I need AI to summarize that pretty much. But what I'll regularly do is I will run numerous tools doing a deep research chat. I will take all of that, I'll export it all like the PDF, and then I'll usually go back to OpenAI, because I do tend to find I like it the best for a general purpose. Claude has some good use cases. Gemini is getting better and better, although they had a recent update that they had some problems with. But I will take all those deep research exports, I will put them in, and I'll be like, examine all of this data, summarize, take the best across all of these reports to bring me what is, the best solution or the best process to address this. And summarize the information, of course, speaking to, my knowledge base so that you're explaining it to me in ways that I understand. And then I'll get an output from that. And then I might do different things with that. But when I'm doing something complex, there can be 5 or 6 different AI conversation threads going on across 3 or 4 different, AI models, all for the sake of trying to get, greater perspective based, because the different tools have different strengths and weaknesses. And as I bring that together, sometimes there's ideas that came up over here that are supplemented by, some tools or links that it found over here. And it kind of brings that together and helps me kind of dive to a solution. And then I interrogate it. And I was like, hey, what about this? Or what about this? Or, I just dive in and I have a conversation like it's a coworker who, had done all this research. And in the end, I can get some, pretty amazing results from that. But you have to take the time. It's still a lot faster than doing all the work manually, and you get better outcome. But, don't try to think that AI is just your 10-second solution tool where I'm just going to pop in a sentence and, get my revolutionary output. Again, that artist with the chisel is taking his time, and he gets great results. And so we can as well, as we use these tools and learn how to use their strengths and weaknesses to produce the kind of output we're looking at.
And one thing I do want to say is if you hear Steve talking about using multiple, LLMs, and, you don't have to start there. He's an expert. He's been doing this for a long time, but, just get started. That's the one thing that I would tell you, just start using it. You start exploring it, but don't just use it and, start asking yourself, how could I use it better? Start to find new tips and ways in which to work with it. And things are going to be changing. You have to understand that it's changing every week. And one of the things we talked about, chain of thought, there are different types of models. And I just kind of want to bring this up, that there's something called zero-shot prompting. If you've never heard that term, which basically you put in an answer and you get basically you get an answer back, right? And you see it kind of write it out on the screen. But imagine if you were writing a report and never backspaced. How good would that report be, right? And if you see some of the output from ChatGPT the first time, you're like, that's pretty good. It's a pretty amazing. But if it had some time to think about it, oftentimes you can get even better results. And so there are what are called thinking models that they're coming out that they're kind of different, that are using almost behind the scenes chain of prompt type of reasoning. You don't have to go and do it yourself. It will actually do it behind the scenes, and you can actually see the way that it's thinking. Like you were talking about DeepSeek. And so there are different types of models. So if you go into ChatGPT and you see all these, there's this, you can select the different models. There are different reasons to select different models. Oftentimes, most people right now are using 4.0, but you could go to 3.0, I think it is. And, it's a thinking model. There are other ones as well that might be able to get you different or better results depending upon what you're working on. Just wanted to kind of bring that up. So something, as you're going through the process of utilizing AI more, you'll know where to start to look.
Yeah, absolutely. And, at first, when we were starting to see some of these AI models being released, it was an interesting back and forth. You would see substantial improvements with a particular model that, say, OpenAI is releasing with ChatGPT, or you'd see Anthropic, putting out a new version of Claude that was substantially better. And then so it was just like back and forth. This one's better than this one's better than this one's better. But we've kind of seen, although there's still development and new models coming forth, they each have their purpose. I don't think we're seeing some of the giant leaps right now. So, you don't have to be, keeping aware of it in quite the same way, unless you're in the industry, unless you're fascinated by it. But, your standard models that you're going to be using through like ChatGPT are really, really good right now. And they're getting better, but it's a slower, more incremental improvement at this point. There's some stuff on the horizon that keeps some people up at night that is going to really revolutionize things, but we're not quite there yet.
And I think for most people, the models are getting to a point where they're good enough. Where even if you got a better model, you could be like, I don't notice a difference, because they're more than good enough for what you're doing at the moment, and it's only when you get to those edge cases that you're really going to notice one of these new models taking it to the next level.
Or behind the scenes, when we're doing workflow automation for various businesses, as we understand the different parts that we are trying to do, some maybe use AI, some maybe don't. There's different models and tools out there. And so understanding what works best for a specific task or a part of the task allows us to use some of those different resources, because there's different costing models with some of these tools. Some are more expensive than others. So when we have an opportunity to, discover what is a model that can work this task just as we need to, but is cheaper than, say, OpenAI, it gives us the ability to make something that is going to have lower monthly expenses and still give us the kind of results we want.
So kind of moving on to the next level, because what we're talking about right now is really kind of what I consider basic or kind of entry level into AI systems. Tell us a little bit, what are AI agents, and what could they do for a business?
So an AI agent is, essentially go back to that intern we were talking about earlier. Just imagine that intern is trained up in a very specific role and use case, and that is their continual focus. And I might have one intern, I might have a bunch of different interns that do different parts of a job, but essentially it is a combination of, code or no code tools that brings together functionality for a very specific purpose. And so just like that intern that was trained up. And, this is an interesting area. When I talk to people in different businesses, they're always like, okay, what's the solution? What do you got? What's going to make my life easier? And this is really where we start to get into the realm of we need to get imaginations unlocked, because every case is just a little bit different. And I don't want to get too far ahead of you here, Bill, but, I always try to, speak very broadly at first with, some ideas of what different AI agents or different applications of automation and AI can bring to helping address solutions. But usually where I find the best place to start is by asking, what is that aspect of your workflow or somebody in your business that you're just always thinking, man, there's got to be an easier way to do this. especially if it's something related to kind of the digital sphere, and understanding what is that boring task or that thing that like we get bogged down. We're having to spend 10 hours every week going over these documents to make sure they're accurate and they include all of this specific content that we need to do. Well, that's a great starting point for automation solutions. And what's really interesting about the AI conversation right now is it's opened up opportunities for conversation about automations that maybe had nothing to do with AI. I mean, maybe these are things that could have been done 10 years ago, just programmatic, but now people are more interested in talking it. People are exploring opportunities, and that's great. And they need to be. But as we talk to businesses, I always like to start with that conversation. What is that pain point that you were dealing with? But often I'll try to provide some, very generic examples, to get their imagination going through that conversation. Most businesses have to deal with, lead generation or marketing or different aspects there. And so, it's possible to utilize, AI agents or automations to, work off of, say, a predefined list of leads that you worked up that are fairly qualified, and you have some information about like their website or something like that. You can actually combine website scraping tools and AI to get an understanding of who that person is, the company they work for, what they do, and craft a custom individual email to that person as either an initial connection or as perhaps a follow-up to provide something of value in the actual email. I'm not one of those people that likes to just use AI for mass blasting of a multitude. I like to use it smartly, and I like when I apply it to use it in a way that it's going to bring some value to them. So if I'm doing an initial outreach to these agents, I might, based on what I learned about them, I might want to offer something that is going to be of value to them, whether they follow up with me or not. But that's also how you start to develop some trust and some curiosity into your organization about the expertise that you guys offer there. But you can craft individual emails that are better than what you're going to be able to write a lot of times, and you don't have to do the research to do it, and you can do it in multitude. I've been hearing some technologies right now that are these agent clusters where it's the same agent, but I can dump in 10,000 emails with information about them, and it spins up a bunch of individual agents in parallel. They're all doing the same thing, but it allows it to process that information tremendously quickly and then send that out. Or beyond that lead generation, I can have, AI monitoring information in my CRM to automate follow-ups or different flags. I mean, there's certainly automation tools that have been built into CRMs for a long time, but I can be a lot smarter about it. And I can look externally from the CRM to look at information on their website or information that I collect elsewhere to move them along, keep them engaged, and automate that process. Tying in a little bit to the voice to text, we can go the other direction. We can go text to voice. So we can use it with phone systems now. So we can create AI agents that after somebody has, scheduled a appointment, perhaps there is a follow-up call that just confirms the appointment with them, maybe asks if they have any general questions. And there's a knowledge base behind that particular AI agent that allows it to know, what's going to be done, what are the typical questions, what is its role in that conversation. And it can, help provide some information to the person as they are confirming their appointment. So, there's so many different things you can do. It's sometimes hard to come in and without knowing them, just say, this is the solution you need. I like to liken it to, we need to go on a date first. We need to get to know each other a little bit better. And then I can certainly provide you a lot more ideas, but I want to hear from you. I want to listen to you. And we're definitely going to be able to think of some cool solutions.
The thing that I think that people, in the way that people need to really be looking at AI agents is look at specific tasks within your organization. Like you said, is, what makes this difficult? Or, isn't there an easier way? I love that question. When you're telling yourself, there's got to be an easier way, that's probably a great place for automation, whether that's an AI agent or just, like you said, programming behind the scenes. That's a great way to start. But think of this, probably we're really not at the place where AI can take on jobs. And what and the people that I'm listening to is AI has a hard time continuing intent over a long period of time. which is, okay, our job is to do this, and to keep that intent over 6 months or a year. Sometimes people have a hard time doing that as well, but AI has a hard time doing that. But think of specific tasks that somebody might be doing within your organization, especially if they're a bottleneck resource. And what's a bottleneck resource? They're a person where a lot of work is piling up behind them, and it's keeping the organization from actually producing more or having more throughput. Those are great places to start. If you looked at a manufacturing facility and there was a machine that just had all of this inventory piled up behind it, and all this backlog, people do that have the same thing. The problem is oftentimes we don't see it because it's often a digital backlog, and so it's a little hard. You go out to the factory, you see all this inventory sitting there, you're like, oh, it's obvious where the problem is. When we go into the office, and in other cases, we don't always see that. And so when you start to understand is where's the backlog, and then start to look and say, is there an individual task that I could start to take away from this person? Maybe it's not even the whole task. Maybe it's just part of a task that's, taking a lot of time, effort, and energy. It kind of give you some ideas. And you talked about, let's say you get an email, what an AI agent might be able to do is go in and read that email and says, oh, new customer. Now, what do I do with that? I can come in and take that information, put it into the CRM. Then I notify, somebody else. I want a thank you gift to go out to them, a thank you email. I can have the AI agent coordinating all of these things in the background, just like you would have a task. It's probably not going to take over to be your marketing manager, but it would take over some of the tasks that the marketing manager might do.
I've heard an area that has resonated with a lot of people in talking about a solution. Again, this is an agent and a solution that is part of the overall process, but that is in the area of quoting. Whether it was an HVAC company that we had talked to, or digital marketing or different things of that nature. Being able to program an agent with a knowledge base of information about how you typically quote, lots of examples of things you've done in the past, of course, keeping the prices relevant and appropriate to where you are. But then I use it heavily when I do quoting so that I can streamline that operation. I can make sure I have a little bit better consistency with it. And it just helps that process go a lot faster. And quoting is like my least favorite thing to do in the world. So it allows me to do that usually better. And it allows the process to be a little bit quicker as well.
That's a great business application. From a personal side, I had the other week, I had some donations that needed to go to Goodwill, and I had bag after bag. We're doing some spring cleaning, and I actually turned on the voice to text feature and basically went through the bags, said, I have this sweater, I have this sweater, I have this jacket, and all these things, and write it down. And an AI agent can often be thought of as an AI that's actually using a tool. And that's oftentimes the way people will think of AI agents. And so far I'm just dealing with the AI. And then I said, I'd like you to make me a list of the items. It actually went out online, found out how much each of those items I could, use on my taxes for donation, put it into an Excel spreadsheet without me even asking, then totaled it all up and provided me with a print-ready PDF. It was amazing. And so from a personal side, and this is, just ideas to kind of get your juices flowing of what is possible, because it's really only limited by your imagination. So I appreciate you've been very generous with your time. As we kind of wrap up here, what do you see as some of the next big steps for AI? What should people be thinking of, or how should they be thinking of utilizing AI? In the next year or so, where do you see it going?
Well, they definitely do need to think about AI. This is not something that you can just stick your head in the sand and ignore. The reality is, as I've talked to a number of businesses before, it's like this is happening. And if you're not thinking about ways in which you can improve your workflows and efficiencies with these tools, one of your competitors is. And so it's just a reality of the world we live in. This is here. It's going to be big. It's going to affect everything. I have seen so many people compare it to the Industrial Revolution and the scope of the impact it's going to have. It's not going to be overnight, but it is going to happen. And especially as we see right now, like the large language models and just interacting via text or video or voice, that's going to start breaking over into the robotic world as well. And so, it's always I find it fascinating to follow along some of the companies that are at the forefront of robotic development, whether it's humanoid or otherwise. And as they start to pair that with, the kind of AI reasoning that we see accessible to us in ChatGPT, just imagine if that reasoning model had access to an arm and vision, what it could do in repetitive tasks. So we're going to see tremendous impact. I had listened to an interview not too long ago. It was the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. And keeping aside from, politics and different positions there, one of the things he was talking about is the reality that as we look at the U.S. Labor workforce and some of the manufacturing that is coming back into the country because of some of the tariffs, whether you like it or think they're a wrong decision, there is some coming back in. And there's a lot of question about, is there enough of a workforce to deal with all of these jobs? And he was one of the first ones that I heard actually talking about acknowledging the impact that AI and robotics is going to start having on everything from the white collar worker to the blue collar worker in the factories. It is going to impact things. We are going to see decreasing jobs in different areas. And it's not always going to be, made up by, prompt engineering jobs in the same quantity. So it was interesting hearing an acknowledgement of that. But, certainly being aware of this, there is also a lot of talk about what's referred to as AGI, or artificial general intelligence. And this is kind of the next step. This is when I had spoke earlier about the advancements we're seeing in different models right now being a little bit more incremental. This is what's going to be the next big step. And what this essentially brings to the table is the ability to recognize what it doesn't know, what it needs to know to perform a task, and the ability to go out, learn what it needs to do, train itself up to produce new capabilities and features in itself. So it's kind of a self-training, a self-evolving AI model. And, there's some people that, are kind of worried about that possibility, but it's going to bring a lot of new opportunities. But in the short term, we're seeing more and more AI SaaS products coming out, and all the existing tools are adding AI to them. So, there's going to be, unless you're trying to hide from it, and you really shouldn't, there's going to be tremendous opportunities to find ways to integrate AI into your workflow. And, getting back to, what we talked about a little bit with the agents, my recommendation for businesses, because you do need to really take this serious and give some thought to it. So is start from those pain points. Don't get enamored by, this tool or that tool. Identify, what is a problem that you're trying to solve. Start to clean up processes before automating them. It's never good to automate chaos. So it's always good to streamline those things first. So when you find something that is a pain point, start thinking about how you can clean things up a little bit and then automate it. It will produce much better results that way. But, there's always going to be that part for the humans to play in as well, and to keeping the quality control or the review of it to make sure you're still getting the kind of output you want. But there's a lot going, even you could spend a full-time job's worth of time every week just trying to keep up with the latest AI news, and you won't have enough time. It's just evolving so quickly. There's a podcast that I listen to. It's called the AI Daily Brief. It's usually about 15 to 20 minutes. They come out every day. What are some of the AI highlights going on? And then they'll have kind of a focus point that they talk about a little bit. But it's kind of quick and to the point, and it just helps you stay aware. But, as much as, especially in some industries, we don't like the impact it's going to make. Ignoring it's not going to prevent it from doing that. And so definitely encourage everyone to be looking for opportunities, and it can make you better, and it can make what you do higher quality and produce at higher levels. So there's just tremendous opportunity, and it's continually evolving, and it changes so fast. And that's, part of why I love technology is because I have to keep learning new stuff. And this is definitely gonna tax that a little bit just because of the rate it moves.
It is coming incredibly fast, but like you said, is don't ignore this. I know it can be fearful if it's not something that you know a lot about, and so oftentimes people will stay away. They'll just push it to the side, and they'll convince themselves, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Right? We won't need it. We'll figure it out over a period of time, and really kind of push it aside. And I think that's a very dangerous thinking. So I really appreciate you bringing that to the fore, and you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for all the knowledge and wisdom that you've been able to share with us. So as we kind of wrap up here, where could people find out more about you and your work?
So you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can include the link in the show notes there. I'm always eager to connect with people that are interested in technology and the application of it. And there's just so many opportunities to learn from each other in this. So I'm always looking forward to those kind of conversations. And it also, as we talk to more and more people, it also broadens our imagination and our understanding. So to see, talk to someone in a specific industry and be able to see some of what might bring benefit to them, it allows us to bring that to a broader, group of people as well. Not, going straight to a competitor and saying, "Hey, let's do this," but it sharpens us as well in it, because we're all looking to grow. We're all looking to improve our craft and our skills. And so having those conversations, is always a great thing to help us connect and learn more.
Well, thank you again, and appreciate all of your knowledge and wisdom. So from Beyond the Office, have a wonderful day and look forward to seeing you next time.